over the other voices there. Maybe not. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I know you do.
Not doing me any good here.
That's okay. We're listening. We're just talking at the same time.
Well, I want to welcome you on behalf of the Historical Society, and I think our topic is especially relevant right now, and I hope the first Thursday Art Walk didn't hurt us, but I think we got a good group of people here. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation. Just want to remind you that Saturday is the Patriots' Day Parade, and we will be in the Patriots' Day Parade, the Historical Society. And if anybody wants to march with us or just watch the parade, you're welcome to do that. And I have a few copies of the newsletter, but not many of them. If you want to make sure you always get the newsletter, you can join and be a member. We'd love to have you. But we're glad every one of you is here tonight. And I'm not going to give a long presentation here. We'll introduce our panel or our speakers here tonight. Bob Borthwick is a local landscape architect and has been very instrumental in saving the digester. And Glenn Matthews, besides being a retired American history professor, is on the board of directors of the Laguna Beach Historical Society. Kristen Nichols is the president of the Preserve Orange County. She has some literature here tonight, too. So I think without further ado, we'll turn it over to Bob. You going to start here, Bob?
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for coming. So Glenna is actually has her PhD in American history, and from Stanford, and has taught at Stanford and taught at Berkeley and UCLA and everywhere else. So she's got a great background for this topic with the New Deal information. Krista Nichols is president of Preserve Orange County, next to me here. She's been really active in this right from the start because Preserve Orange County has been monitoring how this was going to go. And so in the background, if things didn't go well, they had their people that would help us out with publicity and so forth. So luckily, that wasn't necessary because it did work out. So this whole saga began September 24th, which is when the city council voted to see what was going to happen with the digester at the village entrance. And the staff presented four options. One was called paint and patch, which was about $100,000 to just cosmetically patch it up. Number two option was to refurbish the building for storage, which would involve patching the roof leaks, but a pretty quick and dirty approach that wasn't really a restoration. Number three was a full historical renovation. That was about $1.5 million. And with that renovation, the city then would have a fully restored building that they could use for visitor centers or whatever use they wanted. And then the fourth option was to demolish the building and convert it to parking. And so I've been following the digester for a while, as many of you in the room have. And so I actually thought option 4 was not really going to be treated seriously, because who in their right mind would tear this building down is what I thought. And so lo and behold, we got a bad vote, a 3-2 vote to proceed with demolition. But the caveat was if there was a person that could be found in town that would lease the building, then that could be a saving grace. So that was, they say, back in the end of September, and the city put about a 3-month limit on when this process could unfold to find somebody. So I was, first person that came to my mind was Barbara and Greg, because of their interest in history, their interest in buildings, and their just general enthusiasm for our city. And so I saw them at the Laguna. And I asked Barbara, I said, you think Greg would be interested in this? And she said, yeah, I think he's over at the bar, why don't you go ask him? So I walked over there, no arm twisting involved. I just said, what do you think about this idea? You could lease it, and maybe it could be some sort of a little cafe, and at least the building would be saved. He said, yeah, I'm in. And so, boy, that was easy. So if you know anything about these two, they're the best. So then Morris Gandarian was the architect on the digester for the village entrance, and so he was very knowledgeable about the building. So Morris was a wonderful supporter of this whole idea right from the start, and was extremely helpful in analyzing the plans and providing support. So Morris and I and Greg and Barbara met, and Mark Christie was another person I thought of as a possible ingredient in this endeavor. And so Mark said, count me in for doing the food service. And so we had this idea of a Zinc Cafe type effect. Not a big restaurant, but sort of a light restaurant. Mark Christie had the idea of an outdoor deck with, maybe some music like he does at the ranch, and it twinkle lights above it. It sounded great. So Greg and Barbara put in I guess you'd say, an informal letter of interest just before the deadline of the end of January. And they offered to lease the building and donate $500,000 to the reconstruction effort. And so the city kind of thought about that, and there was issues about parking that were somewhat controversial. And a couple of weeks later, there was a meeting, and John Pedig offered the kind of a compromise idea to save the building and retain the police storage aspect of the building, but fix up the outside. In other words, restore the outside in a proper way. So because Greg and Barbara, their primary interest was saving the building and restoring it, the notion of not leasing it and not having the restaurant was not a big deal to them, because the main goal, as I say, was to save the building. So that became the offer. So the city staff then came up with 3 options for the end of February. And one option was to tear the building down, but they realized at that point they would have to build another building to store the police evidence, a smaller building somewhere. And they figured that would be $400,000. So if you add the $400,000 to the cost of tearing the building down and the EIR, it comes up with approximately $699,000 is what the city stipulated it would cost to go that route, demolition route. And then option 3B was the option to restore the outside of the building, keep it intact for police storage, and with the McGillivrays' donation of $200,000, which was just a flat gift, there was no lease involved. So with that, deducting that $200,000, it turned out that it was cheaper to keep the building and restore it than it would be to tear it down by $70,000. So I think that was an offer that it was impossible to really turn down, especially with a amazing amount of community support that was generated in the newspapers and everywhere else. So the digester got a 5-0 vote to save it, and the 25th. That was just a couple weeks ago, so this is all very fresh information. So, what I'm going to do is go through some of the history of the town and the digester a bit, some of the particulars, and Glenn will talk about the broader aspects of the New Deal and the funding for the New Deal. So, so just briefly, the history of the town. And this all kind of ties together. As you know, the 1870s, 1880s was homesteading started in town. People started settling. 1917, Laguna Canyon Road was paved.
I'm trying to figure out the lights. Don't push the screen.
Raise the screen and put it in place. There we go. Hey, Charlotte. Good job.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that, Charlotte. This one's better. Okay. So the city. So Laguna Canyon Road, 1917. Move ahead 10 years. 1927, the city incorporates. 1929, the creek is channelized downtown. Also in 29, Coast Highway is paved. And so if you look at that date of, say, 1930, plus or minus a couple years either side of 1930, that's when this town was really on its feet. We had the Hotel Laguna, we had the Presbyterian Church, we had the fire station downtown, the water district, and so the ingredients for a town were set right about 1930. So to have a real town, you need a sewer system. So 1931, the F.S. Curry Company out of San Bernardino was hired to do plans for the sewer plant. 1932, the city had a bond election so that could get built. But because it was the initial part of the Depression, right, Black Friday and so forth, a couple years earlier, there was no takers on the bonds. So they were out of luck. They had an idea for a sewer plant, but no money. So they decided to apply to the federal government and as part of the New Deal program. And that was 1933. And they got rejected by Washington. So, but Washington said, you have an idea that maybe it just needs somebody to come out here in person and describe it more fully. So there was a person by the name of Elliott West, who was picked by the city council to go to Washington, D.C. He was given a train ticket to go out there and try and make it happen. And he did. So 1934, January, the Public Works Administration, which was part of the New Deal, awarded the city $190,000 and for the the plant, as well as the sewer arterials that would go throughout the town. And just $72,000 of that was for the building itself. So everything went great. May 1935, the plant was completed and the town had a big party. Next slide. So Laguna Canyon Road to me is interesting. Working with Ann Christoph on this Landscape Scenic Highways program and doing some of the historical evolution studies of the evolution of downtown, and to me, how the road factors in is pretty interesting. So, Laguna Canyon Road was a stagecoach line beginning in the 1880s that was established by William Brooks, and that went from Laguna Beach to Santa Ana. So this, of course, cut across Irvine Company land, and James Irvine he blocked off the road, and because it was his property. So William Brooks challenged this in court in Santa Ana and prevailed, and the court said you can't block the road off. So it became a state highway, and it was paved by the state in 1917. So until Coast Highway was paved in 1929, the Laguna Canyon Road was really the only paved route in and out of Laguna. So the reason I wanted to give you that little story is because I think it's interesting to me, especially as we're working on the downtown right now, the downtown action plan and all the rest of it, because I don't know if you've ever wondered, or your friends have ever wondered, when you're coming down Laguna Canyon Road, the intersection where the red hits the green is roughly Village Entrance. And so the red is Forest Avenue. And you think, why is that Forest Avenue when it should be 3rd Street? Because 3rd Street's coming down the hill, and 3rd Street is in the same alignment with Forest in front of the City Hall. And it's kind of a counterintuitive sort of thing. Why is it like that? Well, it's like that because the purple area was basically untraveled. You couldn't travel it because of the creek and the sort of swampy condition that existed in the teens and the 20s. So Broadway wasn't actually paved until the mid to late 30s. So that's why the town itself really grew up on Forest Avenue because it avoided the creek. And so now we see these lovely, intimate, small brick buildings or small storefronts on Forest. That's because that was developed, subdivided in the 20s. And then you jump over to Broadway, and that wasn't really developed until the street was paved. So you had bigger stores. You had Sprouse Reeds, and you had Acorns Market. You had the car dealers and the telephone company. So, I guess that's obvious, but to me it was kind of an intriguing way of looking at it because it describes really how the town evolved and why it looks the way it does. Okay. So the construction of the plant itself, as I said, 1927, the town was incorporated. Took about 3 years of battles within the town and within the city engineering department to figure out where the sewage plant should go, how it should be done. And from what I've read, the city engineer was fired because the council didn't like his ideas, and then he quit, and then he was hired back again. So there was a lot of controversy for 3 years. And then 1931, they focused on the Curry engineering firm from San Bernardino, and he was the one that decided it should go here. And there's a really great story from his great-grandson that I ran across in an online newsletter of sewage engineers. They have their own professional organization, and so I Googled the digester, just trying to find stuff, and there's this wonderful 15-page story about the evolution of this building, and it's wonderfully written, and so I encourage anybody to go on that website. I have a copy of it in the back. But the grandson saw this newsletter, and he then sent a letter in, a long letter, about seeing pictures of this when he was a kid in his dad's office, and how this building was the Curry Company's flagship award-winning plant. And it's a very, very heartwarming story. And I was thinking, once this is done, and we have a groundbreaking, it'd be great to have him there, because he's gotten his blood. So local residents, part of the New Deal, is everybody probably knows, is that local residents were hired that were unemployed to get them back on their feet. The government, federal government, had certain criteria. Like, for instance, they took a list of people that signed up that wanted to be part of this. And the ones that highest priority were the vets with dependents or kids. Second priority, vets with no kids. Then non-vets with kids, and so forth. So there was a social system where they were trying to help families and that needed the money to exist, and so that's the way they did it. They were limited to they could work 6 hours. 6 days a week, but only 5 hours a day, because it was stipulated in the government instructions that they wanted the employees to have time with their families. They didn't want them to work sweatshop hours, which I thought was pretty interesting. They also requested that, when possible, human labor would be used rather than machines. So, human ditch diggers rather than a ditch digging machine was prescribed by the government. Federal minimum wage was paid, $1.10 an hour for skilled laborers, or skilled workers, I should say, and 45 cents an hour for unskilled. So, next slide. So, this is a little more detail of the back of the building. This is the interior. This is the picture that some of you may have seen around. This is the part of the structure that was torn down. This is sort of the settling ponds that were north of the digester building. It used to be, of course, attached if you look at the overall photo images, but this part was torn down in 1989. And this photo was part of the, there was a conference on wastewater engineers that was held in San Diego in 1938. And so they took a field trip up here because this was known as a very progressive and high-tech plant for the time. So this is the way it sat for many years. As I was saying, that it operated from 1935 to 1983 and demoed in 1989. So when they demoed the part to the north, they kept this part. The city kept this part and designated a historic monument. And so from that point until now, it's been either vacant or used for police storage. One of the interesting things I'm sure you can see on the top is the vent. And the vent is disguised as a lighthouse, and I think that's one of everybody's favorite novelty trivia things. I've been docent or bus tour guide, whatever it's called, for the Village Laguna for many years, for the Charm House tour, and every single time, many people ask that question and tell the answer, and everybody chuckles, and it's just such a wonderful, whimsical part of the town. Next. That's and the amount of detail they went to do this, it's just amazing. If you look at that close-up of the little detail at the top, it's just very elegant. Next. Okay, so this is the current building. As I said, it's currently used for police storage. The upper part where the windows are, the pane glass windows, that was closed in. It used to be an open porch, and that was closed in. I'm not sure the exact date, but I've heard maybe it was the 50s. And then this little alcove at the bottom that's made of concrete block may have been added around the 50s also. It wasn't part of the original structure. Those two elements have been there so long, though, they've been there 70 years, that when the restoration plans are done, the restoration architects will figure out what the cutoff date should be for what is removed and what is kept. So that's at this point undetermined. Personally, I think it would be great either way, and I don't think we can lose no matter what. Morris has done some plans. when we were looking at the restaurant aspect of it, Morris did a little plan that showed how this building in the front with the door and the window could be turned into two single occupancy restrooms. You know, if the city ever wanted to do that. This alcove is actually not connected to the main floor plan, so that's something that could be done if the city felt they wanted to. One of the things about this that is interesting is people think of old buildings, from the 30s as being, you hear that they're held together with termites and holding hands and so forth. Well, this building is just the opposite. I mean, Morris and I looked at this, and for the turret or the round part, those walls are 10-inch thick poured concrete with steel in them. I mean, it's just, like Morris said, it's like a bomb shelter sort of. I mean, it's not going anywhere. So in terms of investment, it's not like this building's we're going to spend a bunch of money fixing it up and it's going to fall down. It's just the opposite. Actually, the round part goes underground, about 20 feet, right, Morris? So it's like a cylinder. It's like a grain silo that goes underground. So if the building were turned into some sort of a use, the logical way to go would be fill the bottom with gravel, the subterranean 20 feet, put a slab at same level as the floor, and you'd have a continuous available square footage. The sludge part is, I got so tired of people making jokes about the poop part of this. I've talked to experts in restoration, and making this habitable and having it be 100% sanitary is a no-brainer. That's easily done, and some of the people that didn't like the building, didn't want the building to stay, kept using that as a knife to stick in our back. But it was really kind of a cheap shot, because this is easily retrievable in terms of the use. Especially because it's organic material. It's not like plastic that's burned, that's permeated the walls. This is just simply sewage. Actually, because it's been there so long, you could almost say it's compost. But anyway, the city decided to get rid of that, irregardless of whether it was going to be kept for use or demolished. Either way, they decided that getting rid of the sludge was the proper thing to do. So that is underway. I mean, they have a bid now, a contractor, that's all been approved. So the removal of the sludge is sort of independent of the rest of the restoration. Next slide. I'm just about done here. I hope I'm not taking too long. So this is, got this from Morris. This is the floor plan. You can see on the left there, that's the ground floor. And you see the round part, and then you see what's called storage number 1. That's where the police are putting their stuff. We got to go in there, and there's it's kind of a funny thing. It's like a swap meet, or just a bunch of stuff laying on tables, growing marijuana plants. So there's a smell of marijuana in there. And then this storage 2 at the bottom, that was the little room that was added on as like a little annex. So that's why I was saying if the city ever wanted to do restrooms in this building, that would be an extremely convenient way to do it, because that room is not attached to the other storeroom. So you get into the second level of the digester building. You go up the steps that are on the north side of the building. You can see them on the left. You go up those concrete steps and get up to the top, and there's this kind of an interesting little apartment type space. And I think reading about the digester, they had pretty much 24-hour, it's not surveillance, but somebody there in case something went wrong, caretaker type thing. So that's probably where they lived, because there's a little bathroom up there, there's a little small countertop for, a kitchen. And so anyway, that space is just kind of funky, it's beat up, but it's there. And it's historically, it's kind of interesting to walk through there. So if this space was ever turned into let's say a restaurant or visitor center or any other use, the round element could be connected to storage 1 just by saw cutting through it. Morris has had a structural engineer look at this, and these walls, not only are they circular, and that's the strongest form of an architectural element, but also the thickness of those walls is just extreme. So that you could open up that, connect the 2 spaces, have a steel truss up there, and who knows what kind of interesting uses could be. Personally, I'm really happy that the building is saved, because who knows what the next city council or the next decision makers want to do with it. To me, there's unlimited choices. I mean, if you go to downtowns in other cities, buildings like this are turned into really cool things. Historical museums, Starbucks, you name it, something that's useful. Police storage is not exactly, a thing that's going to turn heads, I guess you'd say, in the architectural world, but at least we haven't lost it, and that's the biggest thing.
Sorry.
So next, please. So I'm just about wrapped up. So this is a plaque. This happens to be WPA, but our building is PWA. It's a sister organization within the New Deal. So we could have a replica plaque just like this. These are small. This would be like 2 feet by 2 feet or something. 1935, but I mean, and I think the way Greg and Barbara's donation was structured, something like this would be part of what the city would do. So we could really make sure everything was done perfectly and properly. And as we have our champagne opening party. So that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Glenna.
I'm going to beg your indulgence because I don't know how long I can stand. I've been gone from Laguna for months, recovering from a broken back. Get my talk. Okay. So I told Bob that I would combine some personal history and some academic history. My personal history is that our family came to Laguna in 1946. I was 7 years old. My dad was going to be the editor of the South Coast News. And, I mean, I don't remember that many things that vividly well, I remember falling in love with Laguna right away. I remember his salary. He was making $75 a week. And I think the reason I remember his salary is that my parents were so thrilled. They were so thrilled. And now, as I've gotten older and I've thought about it, my father really never had stable employment in his field of journalism. And then in World War II, he had a job at the Sacramento Union writing editorials, but he was filling in for somebody who'd gone off to fight. And so when the war ended, my father no longer had that job, and I think my parents were just overwhelmingly thrilled to have stable employment. And I tell this story by way of saying that I came to realize that my parents were completely haunted by the Great Depression. They were haunted by it. I mean, to truly their dying days, they would once, for example, they had lost the key to turn on the gas line in their fireplace, and they loved fire. And I said, oh, I'll go buy you a new key. Oh, no, we couldn't have you spend the money on that. And I said, okay, well, I called, and I found out it was $3. And I thought, well, this, triumphantly, I announced to my parents, it's only $3. I'm going to go get it. Oh, we can't have you spending that much money. So when I got to graduate school, I decided I wanted to do a dissertation on the Great Depression because it had so haunted my parents. And I was at Stanford. My children were in the 5th and the 8th grades when I started. I was a reentry woman. And so I chose to study what was nearby, which was San Jose. And I did my dissertation was a community study of San Jose during the Great Depression. And I bring this up by way of saying, it's one thing to hear about the abstractions of, the joblessness and the, and knowing something about your family history. My father's younger sister told me that before my folks were married, she sometimes cooked for my father. The two of them lived together. She said she had an electric iron, and she would open a can of beans, plug in the electric iron, and heat up the can of beans on the iron. I guess they didn't have a stove. But anyhow, I heard so many family stories, and then when I read the newspaper accounts of terrible, terrible suffering in San Jose, 20 to 25% of the workforce being unemployed, and the pictures in the newspapers and so on. So it became very, very real to me. I interviewed a number of people. I was a graduate student in the 70s. Those people are no longer with us. But I interviewed a number of cannery workers. I was really interested. Having read Steinbeck, I wanted to find out what kind of labor strife was going on in San Jose, and there was plenty. And I interviewed a number of people who were involved. But I want to I tell you this by way of saying, it was an economic downturn that was catastrophic for the country. But it was also the catalyst for some good things. It was a catalyst for some very enlightened public policy. It was a cultural moment. It was a moment that produced some of the great art in our country's history. Obviously, The Grapes of Wrath is one of the great American novels. But I just got back from New York City, broken back and all. My daughter lives there. And while I was there, I went to 2 museum exhibits. One was an exhibit of Dorothea Lange's photographs. Well, Dorothea Lange's photographs are one of the most eloquent. How many of you know the photo of a migrant mother? I'm sure almost everybody has seen that picture. But they had a great number of other photographs. This was at the Museum of Modern Art. And they coupled it with some of her writings. So that made it very interesting to see what she was writing at the time she was taking these great pictures. In addition to seeing Dorothea Lange, and I must have seen 5 or 6 exhibits now, I can't get enough. And my book, actually, I have to tell you, my dissertation was my 5th book, which is an unusual pattern. But that's the way it worked out. But one of the old cannery workers I interviewed lived to see my book, which came out 30 years after I interviewed him. And he was retired when I interviewed him. And his name was Slugger Ficarota. Isn't that a wonderful name? I was able to use 2 Dorothea Lange photos in my book, where I write about the Great Depression. But in addition to seeing the Dorothea Lange exhibit, I saw one called Vida Americana, which is about the great Mexican muralists, Diego Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros. And how many of you have been to Pomona College and seen the wonderful Orozco mural there of Prometheus? That's one of the great works of mural art in the country, and it's here in Southern California. And a replica this one was at the Whitney Museum of Art. And the whole point of this exhibit was the influence that the Mexican muralists had on American artists, and particularly during the Great Depression. Now, many of you know that there are wonderful WPA murals, many of them in California. I'm most familiar, since a lot of my research has been on the Bay Area, but a lot of wonderful murals, Court Tower, and other public places. But I didn't know until I saw this. The young Jackson Pollock, whom we know for his drip art, saw Orozco's Prometheus at Pomona, and he did a lot of his early art before he started dripping, based on Orozco's Prometheus here in Southern California. So that's just one example of the cultural flowering. I mentioned the Grapes of Wrath. There was a Federal Writers Project. The federal government supported musicians, playwrights, photographers. Dorothea Lange's work was done through the Farm Security Administration. And then each state had a guide that was, to the resources of the state, the history that was done under the auspices of the federal government. So the PWA that built our beloved digester was only one of many alphabet agencies, as many of you know. It was passed in June of 1933, so it was almost brand new, apparently, when the city of Laguna applied to it. It was part of the first 100 days. The first 100 days included the PWA, it included the National Industrial Recovery Act, and a few, of course, immediately Roosevelt declared a national banking holiday to save the banking industry. But the PWA did only infrastructure. Later, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, did some building, but it also underwrote a lot of the artistic achievements of the New Deal. So there's never been another time in American history where the federal government has underwritten so many artistic expressions. And here in Laguna, we are very, very fortunate to have this wonderful New Deal sponsored building. I also have to give a couple of personal memories. When I was in high school, I ushered at the pageant, and I used to sit there in Irvine Bowl and fantasize about that tower. I did not know unromantically the whole unromantic truth. I wasn't sure what it was. No one had tipped me off. But I also remember, when did the sewage plant close? 83. Okay, so in high school we were taken on a field trip to the ponds. And when I saw that image just now, I realized, oh yeah, I remember going there in high school. And there are many people in this room. Carolyn Hobart Fish shared with me that her uncle had been involved in running the digester plant, and she remembers being taken there when she was 4 years old. Her uncle, D. Woodward, then became the fire chief, was it? The fifth fire chief in Laguna. And finally, to wrap up, we all have our little parts of the story, and mine is nothing like as important as Bob's, or obviously Greg's and Barbara's, but I was about to be diagnosed with my compression fracture of the lumbar spine, soon to go into a skilled nursing facility. And I read Stu News online, and I saw what was going on with that vote on September 24th. So before I was shipped off to the skilled nursing facility, I guess I must have seen your name, Bob, as connected with this effort to save it. And I happen to know a good friend, Dick Walker, who's a retired chair of the geography department at UC Berkeley. Dick, I had a Fulbright in 2002, and Dick actually lived at my house in Berkeley while I was in Russia, so we know each other pretty well. And so Dick runs something called the Living New Deal, which is a website that's devoted to publicizing the surviving New Deal structures and New Deal art, and to publicizing fights to preserve them. And so when I read what was going on, I immediately thought, I bet you Dick is going to be interested in this. And so I sat down and emailed Bob and said, I'm on my way to the lockup, so to speak, but before I go, and so I let Dick know, and they immediately put something on their website, and so we've been in touch. If you're interested, you can Google Living New Deal, and it's a wonderful record of fights like what we've been involved with all over the country, as well as wonderful images of surviving art and buildings from that period. As soon as I read about the City Council's vote last week, I fired off the article in the Indy, I guess it was, and within a couple of days, the Living New Deal publicized the saving of the building. So I think it's kind of cool that we're part of a national narrative on preserving the best of the New Deal, which is a precious legacy, and I don't think our town should be part of destroying our part of that legacy, and now I don't think it will be. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Glenna. I'm going to turn on my...
sort of stuck. Does anybody know how to? Across the barrel and down there.
Hit the upper left-hand key, escape. I usually push every button.
Thank you so much for having me. As Bob said, I'm with Preserve Orange County, and we're an advocacy group for preservation. And we were incorporated in 2016, and we became a charity in 2017. Our mission is to promote the conservation of the architectural and cultural heritage of our county. And Bob asked me why we would be interested. Why were we interested? He wanted me to talk tonight about why we'd be interested in the digester, the historic sewage treatment plant in Laguna Beach. And the honest answer is that we're frankly interested in how every historic resource is treated in Laguna Beach and in all 34 cities of our county, including unincorporated areas. Yesterday, I spent the morning in the canyon called Holy Jim. Some of you may know it. In Trabuco, where the fire went through there in 2018, and the community that's there has been there since there are cabins there that have been there since the 1920s. So the homeowners want to look at the possibility of creating a historic district or a cultural. It's definitely a cultural landscape. So we hope to help them with that. In terms of the digester, I think both Bob and Glenna have explained really well what the historic significance is of the digester. Obviously the New Deal association is preeminent. The other important aspect is the architectural features of the building. They really represent Laguna in the 1920s, and it really represents Laguna in the 1920s and 30s. Revival styles like that, Norman or Tudor revival, and Spanish colonial revival, because you have the combination there, was very common in Southern California and elsewhere. But for some reason, Laguna architects and builders really embraced the Norman revival or Tudor revival. You see it, and in fact, I was going to mention to Glenna when she said that her father the reason you came to Laguna Beach was because your father got a job with South Coast News. South Coast News is in the Ashbuck building. It was originally the South Coast News building, which of course is Tudor revival. Some would say Norman revival, designed by Jean Gasse, who was a Frenchman, who did a number of buildings, including the lumber yard in 1919. So the style goes back to the very earliest days in Laguna Beach, and I think is an appropriate style for a place that ultimately became so associated with the arts as it is today. So some of what we do is, as I said, we use advocacy and education to fulfill our mission. Our educational initiatives have included talks and tours, and as well as sharing scholarship about the historic built environment of the county. We just did a public talk in Palm Springs at Modernism Week about the modern period in Orange County architecture. And we raised a lot of money to fund a nomination for one of the buildings I'll show you tonight. We raised almost $10,000 there in Palm Springs. We also ran a very popular tour last May called the Eichler Home Tour in Orange. Some of you may have attended that. We're going to be doing more of those. There's real interest. As you know, here you have your charm tour, which is very popular. There's a lot of interest in the county. People don't always want to go to Los Angeles County for these things. Our advocacy work is usually reactionary. Unfortunately, we want to develop a prevention program where we're working more directly with cities, helping them develop their preservation programs, working with city councils and historic commissions. But right now, mostly what we do is respond to the local groups and residents who reach out to us. Our skill set is that we bring a technical skill set. We have land use attorneys, preservation lawyers, city planners, politicians, historic resource specialists, public historians and architectural historians on our board. So we can, obviously we can come to a problem in a way that local groups, they don't necessarily have that combination of skills. So this was one of our first successes in, I guess it was 2017, 2018. This is Coco's now. It's historically known as Bob's Big Boy. And so if anyone grew up in Southern California, I'm sure you've been to a Bob's Big Boy. This was, pardon?
We know how to cruise.
Okay. This was opened in 1965 by Bob Wine, who started the chain, and it was designed by Army and Davis, who this was their prototype that they used and that Wine used throughout in his restaurants. It's on Harbor Boulevard in Garden Grove. And it was going to be irretrievably altered by In-N-Out when a city planner called us. Garden Grove doesn't have a preservation ordinance of any kind. So anyway, we ended up working with the property owner. They actually didn't realize that their building had historic significance. And we've been we worked with them on finding another tenant. And that's still underway. The next one is one of the most fabulous buildings in Orange County. I think it's the Plumber Auditorium on East Chapman Avenue in Fullerton. It was designed by Carlton Winslow, who did a lot of work in Northern and Southern California. The issue there, and Fullerton has got a wonderful watchdog organization called Fullerton Heritage, but they needed some help, again, technical help, sorting through some issues that had to do with ADA. So the school board that owns it wanted to update it for ADA compliance, and we were able to help them to show them that there was a way to do that while still protecting the building. So that was an early success as well. They're still they haven't started the renovations yet, but I think they're starting this year in 2020. This is, does anyone recognize this?
Oh, sure.
Yes, fabulous, yeah. So this is now Amory's boutique on Pacific Coast Highway in Newport Beach. And it was built originally as a restaurant called The Stuffed Shirt. There was one in Pasadena too. It's what we call, it's mid-century modern, but specifically new formalist. So it's got this sort of symmetry about it, and it's quite monumental. And the engineer who assisted the architects who were Ladd and Kelsey, and it was built in 1961. The engineer was Richard Bradshaw, who just died. I think he was 104 years old. He would be considered a master engineer he did some beautiful buildings, assisting architects all over. Anyway, this was the building that we raised the money for. So we're going to be funding a nomination to the California Register. This building, we managed with some local individuals, we managed to convince the property owner not to demolish it. This is part of an 11-acre plan. It's very controversial, actually. This is just the tip of the iceberg. That's on both sides of Pacific Coast Highway. And so the building's now incorporated into the plan, but there's also a multi-story car park that's being considered immediately adjacent. Right now there's surface parking in front of the building, and so you can see the building very clearly from Pacific Coast Highway, and that's intentional. That was the way it was designed, to have that space in front of it. We call it a view shed. Anyway, it's going to be obscured, or a lot of it will be obscured if the parking garage is allowed to be developed. So we are challenging that. The next building is, so I mentioned, obviously architecture is important to us, but also cultural landscapes. So vernacular buildings like this one. This is one of 6 buildings on a 4.5-acre site in Huntington Beach. It's called Historic Wintersburg, and it was originally it was Japanese American owned property before the Alien Land Laws were instituted, and 4 of the buildings are over 100 years old. They're in fairly good condition. But it's taking forever for, it's owned by a publicly traded, the property is owned by a publicly traded waste removal business that's based in Phoenix. And there's the adjacent school district has been in a legal fight, or was in a legal fight with the company over the property. And so they're working through the results of that litigation, and hopefully there is an organization that is willing to raise the money to purchase the property at fair market value from the company. And that's the Trust for Public Lands. So we'll see. The task force that has led that this preservation effort has been very patient. So hopefully it'll all work out. The goal obviously is to restore these buildings and create, there's very little public park space in this part of Huntington Beach. It's near the highway. And so the neighboring community and the school district are very interested in it becoming an open space for public use, and for the buildings to have some use as well for the community. This one you may have heard of. This is Main Street at 3rd, I think, or 5th, in Santa Ana. So originally, Orange was built as the Orange County Title Company. Soon after it was built, that was 31, in the Art Moderne, also known as PWA Moderne style. The company was taken over by First American, which is a very successful, long-standing business in Orange County, title insurance company. And in '66, they were doing a rebranding, and they put this metal corrugated facade. It's really a box on top of the 1931 building. You can still see the pillars in the front. The pediment was added, but those are the original pillars, and the original terrazzo flooring is there as well, just inside. Anyway, the current property owners are developing the entire block. Santa Ana is desperately in need of good quality housing, so the plan is for a mixed use development, and we didn't want to get in the way of that, but they were insisting that there was no historic structure there. And the city really wasn't helping out either. That was their claim as well. So we and a number of other local groups just disputed that. And we got to a point, we worked with the property owner and we worked with the city. And the planning commission and the city council ultimately voted to allow the project to proceed, but they're doing a partial demolition, so they're going to remove the 1960s facade, and we're going to monitor the operation. And they've had to hire a preservation architect. So we're going to see, we believe that this building's underneath, and that it's probably in very good condition. And the company, if the company agrees, they're going to at least save a portion of the Main Street facade and the side street facade.
Is it still owned by First American Title?
It is.
Because they have the greatest historical photo.
They do. That's kind of the irony. Yes, we've as researchers, we've relied on that archive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is the automobile on the right a Netzel?
I don't know. Is that what you think it is?
No,
Yeah.
it's not.
What is it? A Studebaker?
No.
So that's it. You know all about this one, this building. I just wanted to add that it really is a fantastic symbol of the 1930s, when there was so much privation, and yet art was respected as an antidote, and so it's just really special. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up here, but before we do, I just wanted Barbara and Greg to stand up for a second. The Historical Society contacted me months ago, three months ago maybe, before any of this dialogue happened with the city. But the date tonight, so I had no idea. Is this going to be a wake? Is it, are we going to come here with long faces, or are we going to come here with happy faces? And luckily, because of Greg and Barbara, we've got happy faces. So thank you very much.
Quick question over here.
Wait a minute. I want to thank these folks a lot. And can we get the lights up somehow here? And this is being recorded tonight. We put it on DVDs for those people who couldn't make it. The problem is we don't have a portable microphone tonight. So if you have something to say, maybe you can come up and do it here so we can get it on. Otherwise, it won't be on the DVD at all. So, is there someone who has a question and like to come up and use the microphone?
I just got a quick question.
Did anyone here talk about that, on the other side, the big moonlight window that seems to be put in much later, and will that just go out? Or anyone talk about that?
I'm sure Morris knows a lot about this, but that used to be a window, and for some reason, when the city was just patching things together, they put this sort of skylight element, right, Morris? I mean,
The window's still there.
the window's behind that. That's just a funky junkyard thing.
So would you restore the original window?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be the first thing to go.
You have a picture of it? Or?
Well, a picture of, you can see the window is behind that moonlight-like thing, so that would be an easy fix. Michelle.
Yeah, you can repeat my question.
Okay.
Can you come over and give your official question?
She's gonna repeat
She's
your
Just repeat the question. So, if there was a bathroom in there for somebody living upstairs or supervising upstairs, why did Sheree say there was no connection to a sewer line or any water trying to tell us we can't have a bathroom there?
Originally there was, so the question was, if there was a bathroom upstairs, why is the city saying there's no plumbing to the location? The bathroom, I'm sure, hasn't been used since probably the 80s. And it's conceivable that the city just disconnected the plumbing for the sewer and the water just because it's not been occupied. It would have been great when the paving was all removed for the village entrance, it would have been pretty easy to put utilities to that building just in case it was ever going to be saved. I don't think that happened, right, Morris? But it's not too late. It can always be done.
Any questions?
Yeah, I think probably the restoration would get to the paint, the paint colors that have evolved over the years, and I'm sure there's a way to find what the original color was that's buried down. I would guess white. So I've always thought that this is like a counterpart to the lifeguard tower. You have that building that everybody takes their pictures of on Boardwalk, and you have this one at the village entrance. And personally, I think this one would be even more photogenic once it's done.
I just want to encourage those that are going to be involved in this. I know it would have been too much to pile on top of the city, but we can't forget about the lighthouse up on the hill. That also needs to be obviously looked after. And I know that probably it wasn't even in the calculation, but it's in a pretty rad location and probably needs to be get some care. One little correction, with all due respect to Jack Eschbach, the correct name for the building that we call the Eschbach building is the Jarvis building. That is the correct name for it. It was built by the Jarvises. They hired the architect when he designed the hardware store for the lumber company. I think there's a plaque on it that says the Jarvis building. It's still owned by the Jarvises.
Do we have anybody else? Gene, did you want to?
Yes, my understanding is Glenn Matthews' father worked for the Post.
No, the Post was in the 50s. In the 40s, it was the South Coast News.
Yeah, so the great thing about that newspaper being published on Forest Avenue, click, clack, putting the type in and so forth, and then it was a florist. And what was the name of the florist? Eschbach. Apparently, you pay $1 to go through and see the Christmas decorations. It was fabulous.
50 cents.
It was 50 cents? Ma'am, don't correct me. I get enough of that at home. So as Eric said, I go by what's written. So in the Karen Wilson Turnbull's Cottages and Castles of Laguna Beach, it refers to it as the Eschbach building. And so when I was president of the Historical Society, I said that. So I got a call from Joe Jarris. And he said, it's the Jarris building. Eric, I don't think there is a plaque. I don't think they've got a sign saying it's the Jarris building. But the thing, Krista, is that Joe Jarris founded the Laguna Beach Lumber Company in 1912. They built the Laguna Lumber Yard restaurant in 1919. Juan Igas was the I can't pronounce bonjour. That was 1919, and it was a hardware store in the office for the Laguna Beach Lumber Company. And so in Cottages and Castles of Laguna Beach by Karen Wilson Turnbull, that's Normandy Revival. And they had the idea with the buildings there, maybe the old whole town should do it. And then the thing I got confused about the 50s, we had recently Roger Jones, publishing director. Anyway, about John Weld and his wife Kitty in Laguna Beach, and they had The Post, which was another newspaper, and the managing director was Glenda's father. And the Laguna Beach Historical Society, we have a photo.
That's it?
That concludes my remarks.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank these presenters tonight. They've done a wonderful job. I've learned a lot. And the other people that are involved here as well. We appreciate your efforts and that you're here tonight as well. You have something to add?
I just wanted to say that the past 2 weeks have been intense historic preservation efforts. First, we had the digester last week, which was a success. The next night, we had the Planning Commission, we had the Historic Preservation Ordinance, which was not a success. Our historic buildings throughout our town are threatened by this changed ordinance. When you see the amount of work that we have done, everybody has done to make this preservation happen, we can't possibly do it for the other 500 buildings that are also very valuable historically, and we need our city to get behind helping to preserve those, and it's at the moment not happening. Then last night at the Planning Commission, we were talking about the trees on Forest and Broadway. So it's one after another of our monumental things that we love about our town could be really changing in not a good way, except for the digester. So thank you for making that happen. And hopefully it will inspire us to do the same for these other causes.
There'll be some time for some informal conversation, but I wish we could once again give a round of applause to this marvelous presentation. Thank you for coming, and we hope you'll see us we'll see you at our next meeting.